One of the things that I can't help but notice at the moment is this obsession with everyone, quite frankly. It seems to be politicians, CPS, social media. Look at this guy. This guy has just been sent to prison for 2 years for chucking a can of Coke at a police officer or whatever. I don't condone, obviously, violence, and I don't condone rioting and all the rest of it. And I might be being flippant with my timeframes, but these prison sentences for these rioters, in some cases these children, and there seems to be such a sense of pride that we're jailing these people for things that they wrote on Facebook or things that they did when they was a bit drunk in a heat of the moment, which I don't condone. And that's one side. And then all of these other kind of things don't seem to have as much energy, attention, priority and fear. Those criminals are not afraid of what they're doing, clearly. Do you think we've got our priorities right? I guess there's a question where I'm going with this.
No, we don't. I mean, we are in a two-tier society where we treat some things much harsher than we treat other things. I mean, look, if you just consider a few of the stories that have come out, you know, in recent months. So when the Labour government is about to release thousands of prisoners who have only served 40% of their sentences. We've had reports that the police have not solved any crimes, any low-level burglaries, robberies in their areas over the last year. We've got mass brawls between machete-wielding gangs taking place in places such as Southend-on-Sea. We've got children being stabbed. We've got children being blown up at pop concerts not that long ago. And then we've got the stabbings in Southport. And it's all adding to this, I think, more fundamental point that many people feel, which is that the state is not delivering on one of the most basic functions of the state, which is to keep people safe. And if a state cannot keep its people safe, whether by controlling the borders, whether by putting people into prisons, whether by building enough prisons to ensure they stay in prison, then people will rapidly start to lose confidence and trust in the state. And that is what is happening. People are looking at the police, they're looking at the government, they're looking at the institutions, and they're asking themselves the same question. Why can you not keep the British people safe? And that is taking us, I think, Michelle, into some very dangerous waters, actually, because as we've seen, when people were protesting, when they were rioting, infused in all of that was not just petty criminality or thuggery. It was a sense that people had to somehow take things into their own hands because the state could not be trusted to keep them safe.
I do believe that there's been a monumental failing with this current government, Zoe, to acknowledge, and I would put it as basic as that, they don't even acknowledge the sentiments and feelings and anger that have taken people to the streets of Britain. I'm not talking about people, obviously it goes, and I feel like I need to repeat myself all the time on this. It goes without saying that you shouldn't set fire to hotels with people in. It goes without saying you shouldn't be violent, whatever. Obviously, that's all wrong. Nobody would think that was the right behaviour. But there's been a complete refusal to even acknowledge people's concerns, and the primary one, as Matt say, is about their safety within society. Why do you think that? Well, do you agree with that?
I don't know if I do agree, because I think there is a massive difference between being somebody who's concerned about whether the immigration system in this country is broken and thinking you should take to the streets and set fire to a hotel with refugees inside. I think there is a massive difference between that. And I think, as we can see today, I mean, our first segment...
But most people on the streets were not setting fire to hotels, were they?
No, but they were smashing... A lot of people were smashing up their communities. And even if you went along on one of these riots and didn't actually throw a brick at a police officer, you were still standing side by side with people.
Yeah, but these things didn't start as riots, and this is where I think we need to be clear. People took to the streets in protest initially. What then happened is that some of those protests descended into criminality. So let's be clear, most people that attended those protests were decent, law-abiding people that did not get involved in that minority violence, which of course is unacceptable.
I would not associate myself with people who are doing things like that. And I think the majority of people in this country, people who might have legitimate concerns about whether the immigration system in this country is fit for purpose, would have looked at what was happening on the streets and thought that was abhorrent, and they don't know why people would do that. Our first segment, we spoke about Labour's new crackdown on immigration. Clearly, the government is responding to those concerns, but I think there is, and we need to be really careful about this, there is a distinction between having those concerns about immigration and the sort of violence, far-right violence, we saw on the streets the other week. I think they're completely different.
But hold on, when we call it far-right violence...
It was, though. It was. I mean, people were, threatening to burn down hotels with migrants.
But you've got, like,
throwing bricks at police.
These are, like, a lot of these people have been children, like 13-year-olds. Like, they're not. I mean, and this notion that there's this mass, you know, centrally organised far right. I mean, who is this far right? Because to me, what they all seem to be predominantly from their local areas. They don't seem to be mass coordinated. They seem to be very disparate people. So what is this notion of this massive far right thing?
But OK, so why did people take to the streets to march towards mosques and protest immigration when we know that the person who stabbed those girls was born in the UK?
Well, I'm not a spokesperson for the people that destroy places of worship, and I don't condone that behaviour. Whatever place of worship that is, whether it's a mosque, synagogue, whatever, that's completely wrong. But I guess if people were to say what they were doing, when you say we knew it was a person that was not a Muslim or whatever, at that point in time, lots of misinformation was circulating. I think that was one of the things that's caused a lot of problems, social media misinformation. And I think that's where, you know, people like Keir Starmer are trying to clamp down and get tougher. I mean, is that the right approach?
I don't think it is actually just about misinformation. The surveys since the riots and protests have shown us quite clearly that for 2/3 of the country, they hold responsible recent immigration policy in this country. And I think for many people who participated in those events, it wasn't actually only about Southport. Remember what happened just before Southport?
It's not about Southport at all, though.
We had if I just quickly finish, we had the young Muslim lads, you know, beating up the police officers in Manchester. We had the machete-wielding gangs in Southend-on-Sea. We had the British Army officer who was almost stabbed to death by the guy from a minority background. We have had an accumulation of cases, all of which have become lightning rods for this deeper question, which is what kind of society are we building? Now, you rightly say, why are they smashing up their own community? I'd put that back to you. I'd say, how desperate must somebody become to actually trash their own community, to try and express voice in a political system which isn't really listening to them anymore? How desperate must they have to become to smash up their own community to do that? And I think, yeah, there was a lot of criminality. There was some thuggery among a minority of people. But, you know, we saw the videos online. There were women and children protesting peacefully. There were local residents saying, I don't want these people in my community. I don't know where they're from. I don't know what they believe. I don't know whether they're going to integrate. And I don't know whether the government's got an answer to this deeper question as to why can't you keep us safe? And I think that's what people were saying. But why can't you keep us safe?
This became a riot about immigration and it targeted Muslim people. Neither of those things were a factor in the murder of those three girls.
Yeah, but
It was thuggery. It wasn't a legitimate protest about immigration. It descended into far-right violence. People were marching towards mosques. They were trying to burn down hotels with refugees inside. The government now has introduced a package of measures to try and clamp down on immigration, and we're still saying they're not listening to people who have concerns about immigration in this country. Clearly, they are.
No. So, firstly, the government is gaslighting the British people. The Labour Party is liberalising the immigration system while claiming it's giving people control. We know it's increasing migration from Afghanistan, it's getting rid of the salary thresholds, it's got rid of Rwanda, and it's amended the Illegal Migration Act. Watch this space. I'm happy to be wrong. Legal migration will go up. They will not solve the small boats. But to go back to the point about why a minority of idiots and criminals were targeting mosques, everybody in this country objects to setting fires to hotels with asylum seekers in. That's not British. That is criminal. We should call it out. But it's an interesting point to ponder, though, as well. Why was the rioting so intense in places like Rotherham? Why was it so intense in places like Telford? I would suggest one of the reasons why is because this issue became a lightning rod for people who have lived through the full effects of mass migration and a broken policy of multiculturalism, that have seen things like the industrial-scale rape of young white girls and the grooming scandals in towns like Rotherham, in towns like Telford. And a lot of those people, which you saw in the videos, because they were saying they had had enough, enough is enough. They'd been pushed, they felt, to that point by a system that had told them for years they were racist for raising concerns over those issues. That's not irresponsible to point to that. That's me saying we need to get all of this on the table and we need to have a conversation like we did after 2001 with the urban disturbances in Oldham and Burnley. And isn't it interesting? In 2001, Michelle, we had a very mature debate about community cohesion. Now, we can't even have a discussion about immigration because we're having a moral panic.
We're always talking about immigration. It's just not true. We're always talking about immigration.
Not doing anything to regain control.
Can I ask you a quick question? Because you're describing all these riots and protests. No one would condone the behaviour, but you describe, oh, they're far-right people. The people that smashed up Hare Hills, what do you describe those people as then?
I would say they were also thugs. I would say
but
anyone
would you call
who
them
smashes
far-right?
No, I wouldn't say they were far-right.
So why would you call these people that set fire to their shops
because they were they were attacking communities of colour?
They were destroying their own communities.
Yeah, but they were marching towards mosques and trying to burn down...
Hull, for example, had horrendous riots.
OK, the reason I use the word...
describe all those people as far-right, so then I'm interested. If you call people from places like Hull far-right, if they're abusing police officers and all the rest of it, what do you then call people that were setting fire to Hare Hills, their own community, setting fire to police things?
I think it's all illegal thuggery. I don't think you should ever smash up your communities, but there are different motivations for people doing this, right?
I think it's very interesting that this label of far-right gets bandied around, but when the same behaviour, the same criminality occurs, and that's just fuggery.
Well, were there racist undertones to the Hare Hill riots?
I've no idea, but do you know whether or not there was racist undertones?
There were, quite clearly.
Were the Black Lives Matter protests thuggery? Because there was racism there. There was a lot of anti-white racism that was going on at that point.
Okay.
Keir Starmer aligned himself with BLM after nearly 30 police officers had been assaulted.
I mean,
that's a serious point, but this is what people out there are asking.
As Director of Prosecutions, he also arrested people very, very quickly, and in the same way that he did now, the exact same technique of banging people up very, very quickly to put an end to it.
Not
that's
after
not
BLM.
two-tier.
Not after BLM.
In 2011.